Welcome to the Fit Affiliate Podcast, where with honesty and transparency, we talk about all things fitness, coaching, and gym ownership, so that you can feel less crazy and frustrated and alone, while you also find more freedom and make more money.
And welcome to a shiny new episode of the Fit Affiliate Podcast, as Chuck's wrangling his dogs. And we are privileged today to be joined by Pat Barber, as well as Tony, who's throwing something across the room. And Chuck, how are we all, gentlemen?
Super good. 2 thumbs up, but if I did 2 thumbs up, I'd drop my laptop, so thumbs up verbally.
So many thumbs up.
Sounds like he's watering the yard.
Yeah.
That's fine. Or just walking through a pile of leaves. He's like, you know what?
Yeah.
This is the first time I'm going to talk. I'm going to walk through a pile of leaves. This sounds like a good call.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah. We're always on a field trip with Charles. Other than that, everything is great. Still a
Yeah,
great
we
day.
regularly get a tour of his house.
Yeah, come here.
It's like an episode of what's that show, that Ballers or something, we get to see Chuck's house.
It's most certainly not like Ballers.
As we launch into this, we're excited to talk to you today, Pat. For those that don't know, Pat is OG as they come in the CrossFit space, done so many things, but your most recent project is with Atom, Train Atom and Atom Affiliate. So we'll get into a little bit of that, and also about your amazing perspective on coaching and the journey you've had in coaching, as well as some of the OG stories I'm sure the boys will extract from you as well. So buckle in, let's go, guys. Who's
kicking the shindig off?
I talked too much last time, apparently, so you can talk this time, Chuck.
So full disclosure, we'd already recorded an episode, and then the internet kind of ate it. So if anything seems extra weird in this, like we're making references to stuff that nobody else is familiar with, now you've got the context and backstory. So I think what ended up being at least the thing from our own client calls that Tony and I had on the roster, and kind of pieces that the community at large, at least in the DMs I got, that they would really be interested in exploring, was kind of some of your coaching development.
For
and
sure.
we've kind of gone through a lot of backstory. And so maybe if you can just reintroduce how you got into CrossFit and what that transition was like from you just as somebody doing the thing to being a part of the thing to guiding and mentoring and growing the thing. That was really cool to hear.
Totally. So I got into CrossFit 18 years ago, just as a high school senior, just randomly wanted to get fit for volleyball. Got into CrossFit and just kind of at one point in time quit my job working at a local restaurant and needed to go do something that day. So I went and trained. And at the time, Tony Budding, the original director of media, was training. And he's like, yeah, come train with me. So I trained with him. He asked me if I could hold a camera. And I said, yes, I can. And so he was like, do you want to come fly around the country and film these seminars for this thing called CrossFit we're doing? And I was like, sure, man. Sounds great. He's like, I can't pay you, but you can fly for free and I'll teach you how to edit video. And I was like, great. So I started editing video and filming video, and basically got to see all of the best coaches in the world. Because back in the day at the level ones, I don't know if you guys remember this, but there was specialists. They would all come in and teach their specialty. So Rob Wolf would come in and teach nutrition. You'd have Glassman teaching all the CrossFit stuff. You'd have Ripito teaching powerlifting. You had Bergner teaching Olympic weightlifting. You had Buddy Lee teaching jump rope. It was just they would all come in and they would deliver their specialty within the context of, becoming more fit via CrossFit. And so I edited and filmed. I filmed all of those and would just sit and film every single lecture, every little thing, and then take that home and edit all that footage. And, without me trying, the information was beat into my head. I'm a pretty ADD ridden individual. And it was just repetition of seeing it, watching it, living it, doing it, editing it again, editing it again. It was just eventually someone would ask me a question and be like, well, I actually have the answer to that because I've heard these 12 people tell me that over and over again. And I'm not sure why I have the answer. But that didn't make me a good coach. That just kind of gave me a foundation of seeing some of the best do what they could do. And then eventually I was like, you know what, I'm going to try coaching. And I tried coaching and I was really, really bad at it. Really, really bad at it, because as an athlete, things came very easy. So when I went to make other people do it, I was like, well, just do it, man. And I was not effective. And I think that's just the reality of, until you've coached, you're going to be bad at coaching. So I started coaching and was pretty mediocre. And the process back in the day was, you got given a time slot that nobody was coaching classes, and you got to fill that time slot. So I brought in friends who would pay me in SpongeBob checks, and I brought in random people who I could find on the street who wanted to come do fitness, and eventually slugged my way through being bad to being slightly mediocre to getting myself on staff in teaching CrossFit Level 1s in 2007. And then just kind of got the fast track of being around, again, a bunch of really great coaches in an environment that was based on you do something and you get immediate feedback. So after every seminar, it was like, here's what you did well, here's what you did poorly, which is brutal when you're getting it from like Dave Castro and Nicole Carroll and Adrian Bosman and like all these people like constantly. But you either die.
Feedback.
It was rough. But you either die or you grow. And we through that process, I refined my coaching ability. And then eventually helped run multiple gyms out in CrossFit New Zealand, CrossFit Santa Cruz here in Santa Cruz, then CrossFit New Zealand, and then moved back to Northern California to run NorCal CrossFit with Jason Kalipa. And as Jason found new business, my responsibility was to, I guess it wasn't officially my responsibility, but we didn't have anybody whose responsibility it was to make it work. So he was tenacious with finding new business, and he'd be like, this is the giant account we got. And then me and my wife would be like, okay, now what? And he'd be like, make it work. And we'd be like, okay. So we essentially had to develop systems for coaching development and bringing on new people and that whole process, and created a whole bunch of coaching development systems, as well as tried a whole bunch of things out just because we didn't have a background in it. So we tried all these different methods and eventually found stuff that kind of worked. And then had like, by the end of that, we had grown it to like 22 gyms around the world. With just in the Bay Area alone, we had like 70 coaches under our direct coaching development. And then eventually parted ways because we disagreed on the purpose of business in a number of ways. Yeah. And then we ran warm up and workout, my wife and I, which was affiliate programming and lesson planning, which we had done for NorCal CrossFit to build that consistency across those 22 gyms. And we've run warm up and workout for till about last year. And then we got purchased by RPM. And they brought me in to essentially do a at-home version of the best possible training we could with Adam. So kind of Peloton-y, but way better because I'm very authentic. It's shot in one take, and it's 3 people on screen just training. And we also have Adam Affiliate, which is our old warm-up and workout rolled into that. So that's the whole process. I'll go home now.
It is
perfect, and we're done.
Yeah, good chat.
Well, follow-up things in there, man. There's a lot to digest through that story.
Well, I'm glad that
since we've explored it.
I'm glad that actually that last one broke, because there's one thing that you talked about in this one that you didn't talk about in the last one, which was that whole initial first process where you got basically thrown into the baggage hole and then basically taken to all these seminars. The reason why I think you're so fun to have on this is that there's not many OGs left, right? I mean, very few people get to have that shirt. And I don't know as though that's like a rite of passage so much as it's just like, where else do we go, right? Like this is just home. So like we've all kind of like bastard stepchildren. Or
all my friends are here.
Yeah. So, but I think there's so much of those early days that so many new people don't know, right? Like I take it for granted, right? For all of us on this call, even Lisa to some degree is like technically an OG. So like, I just assume everybody grew up in the forum. Everybody was like those early days of the L1s when like no one knew what the fuck was going on. It was like it was a free for all. But I never knew actually that you got thrown on the plane to go video all those.
Yeah. Yeah, it was like I'd never traveled at all in my life. And they were like, all right, every weekend we're going to go film these seminars. We're going to North Carolina this weekend. We're going to down south this weekend. We're going to Texas this weekend. And it was like,
what an amazing opportunity, though, right? I mean, in hindsight, it's at the time it probably was just like, this is the greatest thing ever. But like, and I'm sure I'm speaking for you, but the value that had for, like you were just saying, like just editing those videos. Oh, yeah. Like, at the time, I'm not sure you even probably like understood what it was, but now looking back, you're like, oh, that's a lottery ticket.
Oh, it was huge. I mean, it was huge. I literally got to see the best at what they did do what they did over and over again, and the process of editing video, like I kind of said earlier, is like you film it and then you search through it for a nugget, and then you do it again to make that nugget smaller. Then you do it again to make it. So like one video you're seeing 15, 20 times as you're trying to find the thing that then goes into the social space. And I also happen to get like this kind of leg into what makes decent content as well. I was forced to, because I had and this was before social media was really a thing. We were posting on CrossFit.com.
Yeah, I remember.
And now we're in a space where it's like, I have these random video editing skills. Like I never would have had those if I wouldn't have said yes to, let's fly around the country and do it. I'm like, great.
That's so cool. I think, all of us probably mirror some of that journey. Like Chuck and I, at least, it's like so much of my CrossFit experience is just right place, right time. And a lot of that, and a course that we're building now, we talked about this a little bit, and I guess we'll dig into it too with you again. We talked about last time, which was the positioning conversation, like just the ability to get yourself and hold yourself in that regard, to be invited into situations like that. At the time, you don't even really know what you're embarking on. And the next thing you know, you look back 10 years later and you're like, I literally have traveled the planet several times teaching people fitness things. Like, I'm just me. What? Thank you. Very cool. I'm happy. I'm here. The experience is cool. But yeah, that's an interesting thing.
I think there's a certain amount of willingness to say yes. And I think that's what a lot of people lack is that willingness to be like, yeah, I'll give it a shot, and there's times in life where that's really appropriate. And there's times in life where it's not. And then there's also a period in life where you've got so much on your plate that saying yes oftentimes is just not appropriate, and you have to learn to say no, but like that's down the road. I think especially when you're in the grinding stages, like you just started, you're getting into this coaching space, you're looking at these opportunities, you say yes to everything. Like, even if it's sketchy, like that's one of the things my wife and I have done a good job with is like, we've been willing to say yes to almost anything, like things that are really scary, big life changes. And we're like, yeah, let's do it. And, not all of those pan out. Some of them just completely, like we've had multiple failed businesses that we launched and we're like, this looks like a good call, let's do this. And it just, or relationships with other businesses that you're like, okay, this could be really cool. And you try it and it just doesn't work. And that is a fine line, because I think there's people who are takers out there who will just take from you and they'll never give back. And what was the Adam Grant's book? He's got that whole thing on givers, takers, and matchers. Yeah. So Adam Grant, that business coach, like he's like, there's givers in the world, there's takers, and there's matchers, and most people are matchers. Like if you do something for them, they'll feel inclined to do it for you. Yeah, they'll reciprocate. And then there's givers who, like, without thought of anyone else, will just constantly give. And it's like what makes them happy. But they don't request anything in return. And then there's takers, and takers are like, they'll constantly take from you, and there's never this thought of reciprocating that. And I think he was saying that most givers are either CEOs or they're bottom of the rung. And the
not a lot in between.
There's not a lot in between with the givers, because but the separating factor is the ones who learn to say no. They learn to find it when a taker goes to say like take from them. They just like, they do it one time and then they're like, oh no, I don't want that anymore. And they and the ones that don't learn to say no are the ones that end up bottom of the barrel at all times. So I kind of,
if anybody's looking for the reference, it is Give and Take by Adam Grant.
Yeah.
So, and there's so many good things to talk about. But like, one thing I am really personally curious about, and it's something that you and I have talked on like face to face and on the phone a bunch, but I think it'd be cool to document this, and we can get back to like more standard coaching, development, business development. But you ever played a game of telephone?
Oh yeah.
Where like if I whispered something to Lisa, she whispered it to you, you whispered it to Tony, you tried to tell it back to me, I'd be like, that's not what we were gonna order for dinner tonight at all. I don't know what you're talking about. We've talked previously about how that's been kind of extrapolated out in our own community, that like the education that Glassman had originally intended to be distilled from the methodology, it's been replicated and repeated.
Yeah.
I couldn't even begin to answer how many times. So as you see it now, what are maybe some of the pieces from like having been in those very early on seminars where it was everybody teaching their absolute expert secret sauce piece, but relative to really just like Glassman and the core methodology, what do you think the community is maybe missing or not paying attention to or has overlooked?
Yeah. I mean, the big in your face one that I see all the time is what our intention actually is. Like what do we stand behind, and what is the program of CrossFit here for? And I think what I see a lot of people arguing over is CrossFit's here for CrossFit's sake. Like CrossFit is constantly very functional movements executed at high intensity, and we're like, yeah, we stand behind CrossFit and CrossFit, but my CrossFit's better than your CrossFit, and you're not CrossFit and you're CrossFit. And like, I think that a lot of people have clung on to either the name or the methodology as the reason that we're all here, when in reality, we're all here because of what CrossFit gives us, not because of what CrossFit is. And what CrossFit gives us is a very specific definition of fitness. So I think one of the things that's kind of been lost is we're not pursuing CrossFit for CrossFit's sake. We're pursuing CrossFit for fitness's sake. So the lens that we have to view everything that we do in is, what is this giving us? And is it giving us the most meaningful version of fitness that we can possibly have? So like, I'm not tied to my identity of doing XYZ. I'm tied to my identity of what XYZ gives me. And then I'm far less, I guess, dogmatic about whether or not XYZ is what it is. And I'm more curious as to the outcome of it. So I think this is especially prevalent when you see members at facilities being like, no, this is what CrossFit is.
Strength plus Metcon.
Yeah, you have no idea. You should be really worried about what it's giving you in terms of a long-term fitness, not what you're doing on the daily. You at the affiliate should trust me as the coach to give you what you need, with the larger vision of fitness being our goal. And I think that's hard within the member to coach space, because members come with very specific goals a lot of time. They'll come in and be like, I want to lose weight, or I want to get stronger, or I want to run faster, or whatever it is. And you don't need to give them a specific program to get them those things. You need them to be doing you need them to be doing CrossFit and mitigating injury risk and all these other things, like and giving them time and consistency and a beautiful environment and all these other things. So they come to you with specific goals, but you kind of have to validate that specific goal and then give them a generalized program and allow them to meet their specific goal and then round out their conscious. It's just like, I think the biggest thing that I see missed in that game of telephone is why we're actually all here.
And that's
I love that.
It's everybody caught up in the what versus the why of CrossFit, because we all know what CrossFit is, right? We constantly very functional movement, benchmarks, Fran, thrusters, etc. And everybody is so largely fixated on that distraction, because that's really all what's are. They've all forgotten, or maybe they never even knew why they were doing it to begin with, right? That you said identity a few times, and I think that's the profound differentiator, the marker of success. Like, you need to know who you are to know what you're going to do with this fitness. And there's a lot of people who don't know who they are. And frankly, the idea of learning who they are, it might be the thing that keeps them from learning who they are, right? To some degree. So they're like, I don't know so I'm just going to do more fitness. And then they pour themselves in this idea of more distraction, more competitive CrossFit, things of that nature. But it is so true that the thing that is I don't want to say it's missing now, but it's definitely missing. I'm not sure it's I don't know if it's getting taken away. It's just, as we grow, as the thing grows, it's so much easier to focus on the distractions of what, and it's so much harder to grasp that concept of why. Yeah, that it's very easy.
Well, there's a lot of depth there, right? There's a lot of layers, and I think that when you're first getting into it, like buzzwords and high profile people are what you have to rely on. You have to rely on somebody saying, like, before you truly take a truth in, you have to rely on somebody who you trust saying, this is what it is. Sure. And then you cling on to that truth, and then you have to kind of unpack it on your own. You have to experience it. You have to live it. You have to kind of do these things. And until that time happens, like where wisdom actually accumulates, you have to rely on other people. And with so many distractions and gurus and people trying to sell, in all honesty, bullshit. It's very hard to see the forest for the trees or whatever it is. It's like, there's a lot of people who don't have or haven't had the time to really live it, to actually make their own opinion on it, but they're going to trust a slightly malformed person who's not necessarily of the best intentions, or even has come to that conclusion on their own. It's a weird space. So I don't fault people for not grabbing onto the bigger message. It's
so easy to lose.
So easy.
You know, like I remember the exact piece of the exact lecture that you're talking about at my first L1, January 2nd, 2009. Chuck Carswell delivered it, and he's like, we don't do CrossFit because we care about CrossFit. We do CrossFit because we care about fitness.
Right.
If we found that hula hooping on roller skates in a pink tutu was the thing that produced fitness, that is what we would do.
Totally.
But until somebody proves that to us, turns out it's going to look a whole lot like 21:15:9 of thrusters and pull-ups.
Yeah.
But like that is so easy to have just like go over your head. And it's so cool. The experience that you got of going through multiple L1s over and over and over and over again. Man, every time I go to an L1, every time I go through one or I'm around one, it's like, yep, you guys have no idea what just flew right over your head. Because like you're saying, you don't have the ability to contextualize it. You don't understand that like you're distracted with features and you're not even paying attention to benefits. Whatever your goal is, fitness is the answer. And that seems so fucking crazy and arrogant to say when you're on the other side of it. But like, that's the truth. Like, oh, you're anxious, you're depressed, you're overweight, you're weak, you're slow, you need commute. Like, it doesn't matter. Throw me anything. And I'm be like, fitness is the answer. You want to make more money? Get fitter. Yeah. You want to have better sex with your wife? Get fitter. You want to have more fun playing with your kids? Get fitter.
Yeah, but we're on the other side looking at that, you know,
dude,
we're on the other side to experience that. So it's like, it's really hard for someone to hear that and trust that without living it. And what we had going for us, I think, in the early days, and to harken it back, this is, I think, what you and I have talked about, Chuck, is the game of telephone. We were in the first two people. So the original back in the original days, we only did CrossFit from CrossFit.com. We only did it straight from the horse's mouth. So it was like,
we're going to the wellspring.
You weren't doing my version of CrossFit.com, which is inevitably going to be slightly affected because I'm me. So I'm not the original brain who did it. So we were doing, so I think the example, like, cause I would be really frustrated when I bumped into people who just had the totally wrong idea. And like, they weren't even close to the original conversation we had, but then I took this telephone analogy and I was like, I can't be mad. Like originally, everybody did CrossFit who came to the first L1s, went to CrossFit.com and did that for at least 6 months, where they were just following CrossFit.com. That's the only place you could get CrossFit was CrossFit.com. And then you come to a level 1, and then you go off and you open your gym and you're like, you know what? I'm going to try to program because I think it's awesome. And you use what you learned, plus you affect it just a little because that's good. We want to try.
Because you cannot, and that's part of it.
You know, like that's part of it. But then someone comes to your gym and they learn from you, which is a slightly affected version of CrossFit.com. It's close, but it's not quite exactly it. And then they open up their gym. And then someone learns from their slightly affected version of your slightly affected version. And then someone comes to their gym and like gyms get opened up where it's like, I go to a level 1 and I'm like, who here has done CrossFit.com? Nobody raises their hand. 20, 25 people are just
They're like, what's that? Yeah.
exactly.
You're like, how did you even fucking get here?
Well, but that's the thing is you don't need to do that now. And because it was never a franchise, that was part of the process. So like, that was what we wanted to have happen. We wanted the best practices to come out of that. Unfortunately, in a day and age of gurus and social media, it's really easy to have people who are incredibly influential spout utter bullshit and get seen by millions of people. And you're like, this is really hard.
I think it goes back to like, what is it that you're solving for?
Yeah.
Because if you're solving for fitness, then all roads will ultimately lead us back here, so long as we're both viewing fitness through the same lens.
But we have to think through the same lens. We can't be
and I think like
separate conversations.
You were so close to the origin story. Like Tony and I had a really, really long talk about this yesterday and the day before that, just from a data perspective. That like the open source nature of CrossFit was by design, because Greg knew that like he could only run so many experiments and tests on his own. Like we've got to make this thing a whole lot bigger than it can ever be in these four walls with these people, because like we need to solve this equation. Yeah. We do have the solution to the world's most vexing problem, but like, man, maybe there's some variables in this equation that could make it a little bit better. 100%. And we don't have the bandwidth to test it on our own. So like, let's get the whole world doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that had so many positives. There were so many positives. I think
it changed the world.
So many things have come out of like having such a low barrier to entry, and all these new little people who came in the space and created, better range of motion standards and better movement standards and better rehab pieces and better coaching technology. Like, I don't know if you guys remember when you first came, but to learn how to Olympic lift when I first started was like, there was like 6 people in the US who could teach you with any proficiency. And all of them taught collegiate athletes and Olympians. And everybody else was like winging it, and it was garbage. Like it took me forever to learn how to clean and jerk, and I am a like physically gifted individual. It just
not to mention the shoes were made out of plywood, right? Like
what?
It was not to mention the shoes were made of plywood back then, right? Like it was such an antique industry and such a boutique spot that it was such a like God forbid if you could even find a barbell that spun, let alone somebody teach you what to do with it.
Totally. Yeah. Let alone
raise your hand if you built a pair of rings. Raise your hand if you built a kettlebell. Raise your hand if you built an Atlas stone before there were molds. I don't know. I'm just gonna do hard shit in my yard and hopefully not get the cops called.
Oh, it was so good. But these days, like people bitch about the quality of coaching that exists at some of these gyms, but I'm like, that is leagues beyond.
Leagues.
Like you guys have coaching. Period. You're doing it with other people that have eyes, period. You have a smartphone. You can video yourself. Like, we were in the dark, literally in the dark, just fucking freeballing, winging it.
Just freeballing. And, like, my favorite one that I do at level 1s is, like, people come with such a chip on their shoulders being like, coaches are shit and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, who here when you started moved worse than they do now? And it's like everybody raises their hands. Like nobody starts good. And I'm like, who here is severely injured to the point where they're never coming back? And you're like, no, you're all here. Like, yeah, there's niggles and tweaks and pains along the way, but it's like we have to start shitty. Like you got to be bad. And the same thing with coaches. You got to start mediocre. Like you can have a good hierarchy of like, okay, safety first, things like that. But you're not going to be good until you start doing it. And you're not killing people. Even these movements done poorly are better than people not doing these movements at all. And that's just like that hierarchy of safety we talked about in the very first lecture. And it's like, I don't know. I think that we've come to a great place and there's so many things happening and there's so many people wanting to be better. But I think there's also a lot of negativity around like just this overall
Everybody's
what we
lost.
do. Spaces.
Right? I mean,
and
most people don't even know what they're doing at the end of the day. They're doing something and they're absent of any real personal journey. So they have no choice to either pick it apart or pursue someone else's path, get lost in the journey. I think like the beauty of CrossFit is also its curse, right? And that it's so elegant. It can be applied and implemented full stop to no matter who comes into it. But that's also its biggest risk, right? Because anybody can interpret their own version, their reality, their own experience with it. But I think we talked about this before on a call, was that, everybody can define CrossFit, but almost nobody can explain the application or implementation of CrossFit, right? They're all like,
oh, man.
What's CrossFit? They're like constantly I'm like, no. What does it do? They're like, functional movement? No. Like
compound conflict?
Let alone unpack.
Is it work capacity?
Let alone unpack
buzzwords.
fitness. I this is what I found out through a lot of my coaching development is we created these huge, robust coaching development platforms, like written ones and in-person ones and all these other things. And I would go back to the basics and I'd be like, okay, what is fitness? And most people couldn't give me the definition. And then they'd give me the definition and they'd be like, work capacity across broad time modal domains. And then I'd be like, great, that's cool. What's work capacity? And it would just be blank stare. Like they'd never thought past like, what is work capacity? And I'm like, oh shit. Like we're not, we're doing well because you believe in my interpretation of this. Like that's why we're doing well, because you're executing on, you trust me. And my wife is the amazing programmer and you trust her, which is great. Like trust her because she's really good at what she does. And that's awesome. And we did fantastic. Multiple gyms, 400 members at each one of these gyms. And people were getting more fit than they've ever been, like taking people from couldn't stand up an air squat to putting 315 pounds over their head, like crazy stuff. But they had no concept of what they were doing. And that's, in all honesty, they don't need to, but they need to be following. They need to be like, they should want to unpack that as they go on, and on a very basic level, like you need to be continually asking why, or what is this, or like taking it a little bit deeper. And I think, I always go back to this quote that what was it? It's Aragon, the like kids book. Have you guys seen Aragon, like about the dragons?
Yeah.
And there's a quote in it from like the guru guy in that, where he's like talking to Aragon. He's like, Aragon, you got to believe really deeply in what you do, because like it allows you to have purpose and meaning and direction and stuff, but you can't believe in it so deeply that you can't see beyond it to a greater truth. And I think that's how we have to view programming. That's how we have to view most things, is like, you have to believe that what you're doing is right, because if you don't, like, then you need to change. But you can't believe so deeply that you can't see beyond it to something that might be a little bit better. And I think that's always the vision we have to have when we're coaching, when we're cueing, when we're teaching, when we're looking and analyzing our stuff. Like, it's got to be like, I believe wholeheartedly in this, and I believe in the people who are making me do it. But I also want to constantly question it and be like, is there something greater beyond this? Because I think that'll lead us to a much better place. And so far, anybody who I've seen do that tends to work their way back around to being like, all right, I see the value in constant varied functional movements executed at high intensity with a single workout a day and a lot of coaching focused and all these other things. And I'm like,
all of us that are in that OG camp, right? There's some, I shouldn't say none, but like almost everybody, you, Spieler, us, like all of us are now off playing, right? We're just grown ass kids again, right? We've all like taken it and applied
the best.
And it's essentially the coolest thing ever to be, 40 years old and I can go do all these still things, because like I'm old, you're still the boy wonder, Pat. But like, be able to do those things is still really fun. And I think that it comes down to one thing that is probably just missed in just training in HQ alone, is that I'm not even sure HQ understands the process, because we're all still living it, right? Like the process, and we've talked a lot about this with our clients this week in terms of them defining their core process in the gym, and they're all like deer in headlights. But it's the same sort of conversation, even if it applies to CrossFit, because everybody's like, if I ask you what's the process of CrossFit, they're like constantly varied functional movement. I'm like, no. We've all had the exact same experience, right? There's one phase. Process one is awareness. Process two is that learning phase where you're just trying to actually get past that whole thing, or the indoctrination phase, awareness phase. And then there's like that last phase, which I think takes like 10 years. Honestly, where you're like,
it's super cool. Interesting.
And like, that's why it's missed.
Yeah,
I was trying to find the quote on belief that Pat was talking about, so we could get the actual quote. But there was a really interesting one that I stumbled across by Louis Aragon that I think speaks to this, both on like the application on the client side, like our own personal fitness journeys, but also just everybody goes full circle. We know that the nature of genius is to provide idiots with ideas 20 years later. And it's like, here's all of us. And we're like, holy shit, Greg was so smart. There's so much. Like, regularly learn and play new sports. It took me like, years and years to get it. Greg was like, you guys get the fuck out of the gym. Go do amazing shit with your fitness. It's going to help us bring more people into our community. You're going to be healthier. You're going to be more well-rounded. You're going to understand fitness. We're like, I'm going to get better at exercise.
Dude, it's wild because like Greg had a lot of failings, and I just like and that's just a reality. We all do, but like he was brilliant when it came to the methodology and everything that he did. What the things he put definitions to, the way he spoke about things, there was a certain level of simplicity to what he was saying that you're like, oh yeah. But then what's crazy to me is every time I unpack it and go deeper or challenge it and want to push on it, there's depth. There's like
so much
statements. Like I constantly challenge everything that we do because I've been in it so long. It's been 18 years. Like of course you're going to have doubt. Well, maybe intensity leads me to die an early death. Like maybe like my knees are going to be broken forever. Maybe like you always want to unpack. Okay, maybe the anatomy that we talk about, the depth of range of motion in a squat, that's not the right range of motion. And like all the time with a lot of my older staff members, we sit down and we pick apart these lectures, and like we get really nuanced with it. Like we'll go into being like, why is the 10 general physical skills called the 10 general physical skills, which is a list of physiological adaptations versus the Hopper model, which is a test of skills and drills? Why don't we change the name skills? Like we are constantly unpacking these pieces and being like, well, is this true? And every time I do, it's like occasionally I'll find like something that could maybe be worded a little differently. And then I look past it and I'm like, damn it. It was worded that way for a reason, and it like we want to find, I think as any curious individual would, we want to find fault with things. You want to find, okay, where maybe this isn't
curious.
True. You're curious.
Dude, I think that's part of what makes a great coach. Like a great coach is endlessly curious. Like, why are you the way you are? Why does this problem exist? How can we solve this problem? How can we solve it better? But you said a really interesting word, like nuance. And so this is a quote that I fucking love that I've really come to later in the coaching game. But the novice finds novelty in variety. The expert finds novelty in nuance. Like, I am endlessly fascinated by watching normal humans walk in the airport. I could look at like fucking ankles, knees, hips. Like I could just watch people move through life all day long. But like early in the journey, I'm like, I gotta watch these hook grip videos. I gotta, go and look at these high level movements. And you're like, nah, man, it's all the nuanced, super tiny shit. Learn to fall in love with like the most boring, basic pieces, and that's the secrets of the universe.
Oh yeah, I mean. I think not directly in that vein, but one of the things that we find as we coach is like most people respond the same way to the same things. So like when I get a class of 30 people, I can, through process of like coaching for a number of years and refining my cues and movement and speech patterns and stuff, I can get all 30 of those people, like for the most part, moving pretty damn well in a snatch. Like it's not hard, even if I've never met them before. What's now fascinating are the people who don't respond the same way. Like what's now fascinating is when I throw out a cue that works 98% of the time because that's just how it works, and they blow it, and you're like, oh, that's exciting. Whereas like initially that's really overwhelming because you're like, oh my God, I'm in charge of all these people and I don't know how to make them better. But what you realize is like most people respond the same to the most things. So like when coaches get, and I think you and I have talked about this before, but when you get into it, you have such a limited skill set. You have such a limited number of things you can do. You got a hammer and you're hoping that everything's nails, and you're like, and like you're hitting screws with nails, and you're like, well, that kind of worked. It pushed it into the wood, but it broke.
I mean, it did not work.
But like most things were nails, and you're like, you know what? I'm doing pretty good. And then you realize there's this other tool, the screwdriver, and you're like, oh my gosh. And then you're looking for screws everywhere, and you're like, check this out. This screwdriver now works. I'm like, that's
but then you want to screw everything, and you got the nail, and you're like, this goddamn DeWalt drill's such a piece of shit now.
Exactly. And so, but what my favorite, well, not my favorite, but the thing that I see happen all the time is they find that like, oh man, I love, that's a bad way to say it. I love screwing. I love using the screwdriver, and you talk to everybody like the nails don't even exist anymore, and you're like, no. Everybody's using hammers. Y'all gotta use these screws. And you're like, you just lost the hammer behind, and then you get past it and realize that, oh my God, there's a bunch of different kinds of tips that you could use for screwdrivers. Like there's a star bit, and there's like a square bit, and there's a Phillips head, and you get in the weeds of that, and you're like, well, let me find all these little nuancy pieces, and you forget that some people just need to be hit with a hammer, and you're like, and you're like, I gotta go back to the hammer now, and then years down the road, you've got all these specialized tools, and you find yourself mainly using a Phillips head screwdriver and a hammer.
Yep.
And you're like, it's cool that I have all these tools, and I know they all exist, but most of the time I'm using this hammer and this Phillips head screwdriver and just making 98% of shit happen. And then when people pop up who are that hex bit, punch in drywall screw, you're like, yes, I can use my tools. It's, I mean, to most people who don't understand tools might not have got those analogies, but it's like you realize that way down the road, most of it is just the basics. So to be mad at people who only have the basics is silly because they're doing so much good. And it's like, that's to me in coaching development, when I help people, it's like, let's get them these basic principles. And the way you show them that is by modeling it. Show them these basic principles by how you run a class, how you speak about things, how you don't overcomplicate things, and make it big and dumb and have them copy that. And then they can go through their own journey. Because as much as I want to say that I want to walk someone from that first part to that end part, you got to be the turd in the middle who's using the screwdriver when they shouldn't. And
you have to.
Who gets all the different fancy tools and tries to use them and is saying that these tools suck. Like, you have to. You can't.
It's a lot of just not knowing who you are on the job site, right? I mean, if we're sticking with the same set of analogies, like the entire coach's journey, so to speak, starts at a phase that they don't really accept and understand, and that's like the learning phase. But like that first whole chunk of who you are is essentially the teacher phase. I just lost my thing, but and from there, everybody doesn't understand that like that's who they are, right? They're so busy showing up with tools. Instead, all they had to really do is move themselves to a coach. And then when you get to be a coach, you just understand that, like, rather than showing up being like on the job site with your screwdriver and your hammer, and you're like, everybody's got to be able to figure this out. Later on as a coach, you just show up and you're like, what kind of tools am I going to need? And then you deploy those. I think that's the part of the coach's journey that ends up getting lost on so many people because they're like, I'm a coach. And then they show up with their toolbox. And I'm like, that's a trainer. You're a trainer. You're not a coach yet. Because coaches show up with no tools and they're like, Pat's a screw. Somebody give me a screwdriver, right? Like, and that's really the difference in it. And I think that's the reason why I'm happy that you're on here, because for a lot of people that are listening to this, the coach's journey is important because I don't think anybody really talks about that, right? Like everybody knows how to get started in CrossFit. It's level 1, level 2, 3, 4, but like that's the extent of any framework of the coach's journey that anybody knows, right? Like they're like, I guess I'm going to do my level 2 now. Then I'm going to do my 3. And I'm like, for what? Right? No, those are great things, but like, why are you doing them? Right. And they're like, that's what's next. But you are, by all definitions, like the quintessential professional coach, right? Like when we talked about this in the last call, what I think is interesting about you, the one and only Pat Barber, you followed a pretty unconventional, but also conventional approach. Like most coaches, they know how to start, but they don't know how to finish, right? They're not really sure where their end game is. And so most of them are just like, I guess I'm going to own an affiliate one day. And like, you kind of went your own path always, right? Like, and that led you through some pretty normal, but also some unconventional things. So maybe we could talk a little bit about like what your coach's journey was like from like, you being the film boy, was ultimately like cast for like a porn director almost. Like, can you hold the camera? Be like, I think I don't want to say yes to this, but yes. So tell, I guess, everybody a little bit about like what you would consider your coach journey, because you are unconventional, but you should be the target avatar for all those people, because like, I'm not saying you've made it, but you've definitely made it.
Well, I appreciate that, first off. And I think I am unconventional in the sense that I've found a way to make the profession of coaching work the way I wanted it to work. And I think there are a number of ways to make that work. I think the boys at Active Life actually do a pretty good job of creating a professional coach, of like building a one-on-one sort of relationship with people and charging a higher price point and fixing broken people and offering personalized programs. I think that is definitely one route that a lot of professionals can take who want to be professional coaches. But I don't like that. Like, I don't like that process on a one-on-one level. So I never wanted to head that direction. And because I felt like what I really enjoyed was the group class. What I really enjoyed was playing to a larger group of people and creating the environment and being a professional CrossFit coach, like in that regard. So I had to create avenues where that was doable for me. And that started first with, just being a coach, and then going to New Zealand and being a coach there. And then I also, went on level 1 staff, and that's a way of really fast tracking your own growth, just due to the nature of the type of people that you're around.
Yeah.
I think when you're talking about coaching development, and we've kind of spoken about this a little, we did last time, but coaching development, like the number one thing you can do is be around people who are better than you at coaching and watch what they do and see it all the time and try to mimic what they're doing. And your own version of it. You don't need to be them, but you need to see what really, really works and then unpack why that's working. So I think after that, like of constant growth, like I realized I didn't want to go into the avenue of like selling one-on-one training, because I don't enjoy that. Like, and so I was like, how can I make this bigger? And so one was going to a larger company like NC Fit was, or NorCal CrossFit. And I was like, okay, within this space, I'm going to be the type of coach where people come to my class and they're like, holy crap, that was the best class I've ever had. And every time I taught, that was my intention. And it wasn't to like shit on other coaches. It was like, that was the experience that I wanted people to walk away from my class with, which then made it so I was in a position to have other coaches see that and go, okay, this is what coaching should be, which then put me into the position of being the coach and developer. So now I'm coaching coaches. So that's where I took that, was like, how can I use my skills to coach other coaches? Okay, that's where I am there. And then I just had to kind of continually figure out ways to make what I was doing hit more people. And so if I was coaching coaches, then each one of those coaches was going out and coaching more coaches. And I had to constantly seek avenues to where I could use my skills on a bigger and bigger platform, so to speak, in order to end up in the place that I'm at, which is coaching for Adam, which is I can coach 3 people through a session, make it really, really amazing, and have 100 million watch that session and get as much as they can from that. It'll never be as good as me being there with them, but it's the avenue I've taken that allows me to do that. I also have a unique background in being in film and stuff, because I had that. So being on camera was very comfortable.
Casting couch goes a long way. I mean,
yeah,
you got to start somewhere, right?
What? Stabbing cabinet.
Yeah.
Well, I think that like maybe that is a piece of actionable coaching development that a lot of people could take away. Is if you feel like you are good at delivering things, video yourself.
Oh my God!
Run that litmus test, because you think that you're like the fucking man. You're like, I'm so good at using my words and talking, and then you watch the video and you're like, holy shit, who hired that guy?
Yeah.
Video yourself. If you're a coach out there and you want to just get better, if you have no other resource, just like Pat was saying, find those nuggets in your own coaching and then figure out how do you get to more nuggets with less words faster. That's an amazing thing that is super accessible to everybody. Just like video, a whiteboard brief.
Yeah.
But make sure you have nothing coming after it, because you're going to feel real bad about yourself.
Yeah, don't do it going into a sales.
Set aside some safe space so you can process your emotions safely and on your own. And then go about your day.
I mean, there's a lot of little things that you can do like that, to where you realize that things become automatic, for better or for worse. Like if you're not put in a position of people being like, hey, why'd you do this, this, and this? Some things can become automatic that you don't unpack. And one of the drills I used to have some of our coaches do is I'd be like, I want you to pretend that you're running a class. And I want you to write down literally every piece from when you walk in the door to when you finish that class. What's that going to look like? And for someone who's really thought that out, you know, it's as detailed as like, okay, I walk in, I say hi to the person at the front desk, I lock eyes with anybody in the room, and I give them a solid wave. I walk down the hallway, I check both trash cans to make sure that they're not full of trash. I walk in, I look at the whiteboard, I check members in the gym, I get a sense of the feel for the gym. I go to the whiteboard, I see what's written up there, make sure it double checks with this piece on my app. You know, I do all these things. Like I set up my question of the day. Like there's this process you can unpack that's really, really happens organically. But if you think about it, you can see each one of those pieces. And what I noticed is that less experienced coaches have these massive gaps in what they're doing, where they don't know. They're just like responding to what's happening. There's no process there because they haven't done it enough. They need to have kind of like lived it, and they can't even visualize what they're doing. They can't close their eyes and run someone through that. And you can do that for a full class, or you can do it through a movement. Like, so right now, if I were to pretend to coach somebody through an air squat, like I could close my eyes, have nobody here and be like, okay, hey, nice to meet you. My name's Pat. All right, let's go through this air squat. First thing we're going to talk about is our stance. All right, no, a little wider with your stance. No, a little bit narrower right there. Okay, now shift your feet out a little bit. All right, stand nice and tall. This is going to be your stance for each one of these movements. Let's try not to move from here. I want you to go up into your toes. Okay, now shift back to your heels. All right, now sit. Now go between those two. All right, relax. That was good. No, a little bit further back. All right, chest nice and tall. When I say down, you're going to go down. When I say up, you're going to come up. It's going to look like this. All right, ready and down. All right, stand up. I love what you're doing there. You shifted your toes a little bit. We're just going to focus on keeping our weight in our heels. All right, stand up and down. All right, there it is. Okay, I settle and stand. All right, next thing we have to layer onto that is our knees pushed out. On this next one, we're going to focus on the heels and the knees pushed out. So I'm not teaching anyone right now, but that's the general process like you go through. And I can visualize.
Just taught everybody listening. Everybody just got a master class in the air squat by the Pat Barber.
But it is so true. It's like you don't get a chance to appreciate that most people do most things mostly the same. Like a quote that we use internally endlessly is "People be peopleing."
People be people for sure. But like
you find like that hammer and nail connection. You're like, cool. Coaching gets a whole lot simpler later in the game when you have a chance to strip back. Like these will get me 90% of the way with 90% of people. But it takes a long time to figure out what that is, especially as you guys both talk about, like if it has to be true to your own identity and your own belief system of like coaching and fitness and what you're trying to do and deliver.
Yeah. And I urge you to unpack that for yourself. I urge everybody to be like that. Okay, if I'm teaching someone this, do I need someone to respond to? Or do I have something I'm going to do and then within that respond? Like, because in everything that we do, we should be obviously looking to see what's happening, but we should have this process that we go through that I could have no one here and run through that and know that things are going to happen. I find that especially teaching level 2s, I'll be like, okay, so what's your plan? And their plan is, okay, I'm going to make them do the full movement and respond to what's in front of me. And I'm like, well, that'll work sometimes. So what if I had to unpack it, you know, and there's nothing there. And I urge coaches to do that just on a basic level for every single movement, whether it's a muscle up or a push up or a squat, like have this plan that you're going to go through and tick things off along the way. So yeah, anyway.
And then like on the other side of like that same continuum, keep in mind that like anything's better than nothing. And even like exposure to like a garbage session of push press coaching, fucking everybody's coming out of the backside a little bit fitter. Like it's okay. Like be okay fucking up, failing, missing, being sloppy. Absolutely. And like that's part of what makes it beautiful and incredible.
Absolutely. Because there is the other side of that. Like I've had these coaches who I put through a class or a coaching development session. And I'll be like, there could literally have been nobody in front of you, and that would have been the exact same session.
Right.
So like they have all the words and they're saying all the right stuff, but there could have been nobody in front of you, and it would have been the exact same process. You didn't talk to a single person. You talked to all of them, said all the right things, but made no changes. And it's bizarre when you see that because there's this dissonance, like this person just – like presenting and delivering and freaking no connection. And you're like, huh. And it's that whole other end of the spectrum. Someone who's truly reactionary and only responding to what's in front of them. And the other person's on the other thing who's like in their own little world, delivering all the content because they have all the bullet points.
They're just
but
presenting
a class of goats, and they would do the same class, like.
We talk a lot about that actually in a course, which is like the 6 pillars of a professional coach, which is not about like developing their skill set. It's literally just the phases that a coach will go through as they develop these pillars, and they go from essentially, the researcher we all start as to a teacher, and then honestly as they move themselves up to like coaching. But I think that brings us to the one other part of this is that I think a lot of people pursue coaching as an opportunity, but they don't understand that they're stepping into an obligation. And that I think brings a lot of weight to it, where it's like, this seems like a lot of fun, but there's a big differentiator between those of us who are drawn to this because we're like, this seems like something to do. And then there's all the rest of us who are just like, I'm obligated to do this. That sounds altruistic, but that's knowing that like I'm not going to leave this situation with 1 or 20 clients until I have solved the problem, right? Like if you need me, well, I'm stuck. But then what they don't realize is when you develop the coaching skill set, it never turns off, right? And everybody who's around you, your wife, your family, your friends, you find yourself coaching them, being like, why do you think you did that? And they're like, not right now. Please stop coaching me. I'm like, sorry, I don't want to do that. But I think that's all driven by the early days for so many of us, the power of a just cause, right? Like, I think the thing that really drove you and it drove the rest of us is that like, it was always about, I don't like to use the word legacy, but it was always about legacy. Like none of us wanted to become a personal trainer because when we were back then, it was so obvious we're going to change the world. There was no chance we weren't going to change the world because that just cause was so powerful back then. So the idea of personal training was already failed. I was like, I can only help like 10 or 15 people. I'm trying to literally change the entire county, state, region. So like scale was the only option. And like, that's why the group class for all of us back then made so much sense. It wasn't about like more people, more money. It was like, it was exponential reach. And so however you pursued that. And I think maybe that drives a lot of us that are old school. I mean, maybe it's just because we're just crotchety old men now. We just whine about back in our day. But I mean, I think that part's missing from a lot of the new journeys where they're just like, they're distracted by the opportunity. They don't understand the obligation. They don't understand the why versus the what. And a lot of that just comes from time. But I think there's a real easy way for you to step back and realize that even if you're a new person, a new coach, like if you're going to change the world, and you can, like you just got to think bigger. And so in following that, the sky's the limit. That's why I think it's cool to see like coaches, people like you who have done that and have been able to increase that reach exponentially without just, I don't want to say, but basically pigeonholing themselves and owning an affiliate, right? Like owning an affiliate is an exponential reach, but even that, it gets you limited to like 150 key relationships, which is better than 10, but I mean, you can reach thousands.
You could, yes. I mean, it's definitely possible. I think, especially depending on the psychology that you have, it can be incredibly overwhelming. Like if you're the type of person who actually takes on board other people's emotions, like you have a high level of empathy to where you're almost considered an empath, I think you're setting yourself up for failure. Should you think too big, it should be more, who can I help, who's in front of me? And letting that relationship be really organic. I'm slightly cold in my larger, I don't actually bring on board other people's emotions. So for me, like I'm going to do everything I can to provide the opportunity for as many people as possible, because if it doesn't work for them, I'm not going to take that on board personally. So I think you just have to be cautious with who you are in your own mentality of like, are you going to take on board other people's failures? Like you can, like, cause you can to a certain degree, but I think there's also an opportunity to own it and be like, okay, what could I have done differently, here, but not let it destroy you. And I think that some people would let that destroy them. Like I think that's one of the battles that's really difficult within a gym, even as just a normal, like coaching 10-person classes. It's like when somebody doesn't come back or they fall off the wagon and whatever they're doing, they have really hard shit go on in their life and they leave and you're like, what did I do? How did I let that happen? And it's really easy to take on board, and you just have to be resilient in that regard of like, that's going to happen. Like you can't fix everyone.
call it surgical compassion is really the words that because everything ends up getting catchphrased around here, but it is so true. It's very easy to fall into the empathy and sympathy bucket, right? Where it's like, you can very quickly empathize with people or sympathize with them. But like, as a coach, like, surgical compassion is essentially the agreement that, like, if you need my help, I'm going to help you. You might not like the help, but I'm going to do it and we're going to get the job done. It's up to you whether or not you implement it. That's not the same as like, I understand, I'm sorry this happened to you. Let's work through this together. Like, I don't need to understand it, but I know how to solve the problem. And I think that very few people, I'm with you, I'm on the same page of like, I'm very cold as a coach. People are like, I PR'd. I'm like, you were supposed to. You did everything you were supposed to do. You hit all the numbers, you've done all the progressions.
I'm not cold like that, Tony. Don't you put that juju on me.
But I'm like the worst. Everybody's like, maybe congratulations. I'm like, oh yeah, you can go ring the bell now, right? But it's that sort of same thing where it's like, you don't get caught up in it because you're like, great, I got more work to do, and it just never ends. It's always something.
Well, and I think that might be like the cool capstone to end it on, is like, it comes back to all three of us as coaches have our own very defined identities, and so like we're all very comfortable executing in very, very different ways at very high levels relative to the industry, the standard, the norms. Like, don't be fucking cookie cutter. Be in pursuit of your own best version of yourself. And it'll save you so much like trauma and heartache to just not feel like you need to go down a path, a way, because somebody else did it, or like it's this easy insertion of yourself in some like fabricated dream identity. Dude, the people I meet on the weekends when I coach seminars are like, I want to coach on seminars. We're like, cool, like let's explore that. And you get like through, a conversation at lunch, it's like, you hate flying, you hate being in hotels, you hate public speaking, you don't want to do the same thing over and over and over again. Like, I don't know if you know this, but this is not a good fit for you.
Right. Well, I think a lot of people fail to unpack what they're doing, but yes, I really appreciate the capstone of we're all totally different in terms of our own, like we're all very effective at what we do, but we can all do that in our own way. I think watch people who are super effective. If part of that vibes with you, be that and do that and pursue that. But if it doesn't, then head the other direction. Like I think there's many ways to be incredibly impactful in huge spaces, like, or even in small spaces. Like it's this coaching game is not super linear in my mind. It's also not super cookie cutter in the sense that you need to be the same way as another. Like, that was a huge learning point that I had for me, was I thought people needed to be like me in order to be effective because I knew I was effective. But when I watched somebody who was the opposite of me be equally as effective, I was like, huge mind blown of like, oh, you don't need to be me. You just need to be effective. Now, what does it mean to be effective? And then that's what we unpack, So I think see people you like, steal their shit, become as good, become like them in whatever ways, but put your own little twist on it because you are what make you unique.
Well, that's the back to that beginning of the journey. So many of us in the beginning, that's what we all had. The beauty of CrossFit way back then is it was so open source. It was the only place you could go and learn from high level coaches regularly. And I think that like that's a good point to end on, is that like CrossFit exists in a weird space right now because a lot of people are trying to privatize their information, which is interesting because the entire emphasis of CrossFit was the antithesis of that. Like, blow this thing open, make everything free, make it available, and they're going to come to you, right? And now there's an information industry that exists, so to speak, where it's much harder to find people who are willing to share their information. So what you have with Adam, I think, is very valuable to a lot of people, because otherwise, and we said this in the last call, for me to learn from somebody like you, I would have had to have flown to Santa Cruz, California, and then hung out and chased down the ducks and look for the eggs with you, which I'm down to do, and I'll be out soon. But with Adam, they have the ability to watch somebody like you run a master class, right? And I think that's very valuable. And I think if people don't understand that resource is there, they should take advantage of it, and maybe they overlook it. And I'm imploring them to go watch coaches like you coached, so you can see just what it looks like when it's done really well.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I think what I urge you to do when you watch those is look at the simple things, look at the transitions, look at the types of cueing that are used, look at the general framework for patterning of speech. Like, look at for the simple things, because that's what I think those things highlight well. It's just like, You got 3 people on camera or on class, and I also have to speak to a camera. And like, let's look at the pacing of the class. Let's look at the engagement with the people, like those kinds of things. So, yeah,
for sure. You're definitely. So I guess if people want to find more information about you, how do they find Adam? How do they find you? How do they chase down a day in the life of Pat Can't Make Girls?
You can find me on Instagram at Pat Can't Make Girls, because I only produce Y chromosomes apparently. You can find Adam at Adam Affiliate on Instagram, or train.adam. And then you can also check all our other stuff on RPM. We've done a bunch of really funny content recently. We got this whole series with me and this guy, Connor, the guy who's in Connor he tests all the workouts for Dave Castro for the games. And he's this 6'3" stud of a kid who's an amazing coach as well. But we just sat and bullshitted on talking about stuff like we were, and it's very fun. So we're releasing a series of those, so check those out.
Awesome.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, gentlemen,
for jumping back on with this. I really like how this one came together.
Let's do it again and again and again. But let's just produce them.
Just every week. It'll just be the saga of Pat. It'll be great. All right,
there
guys. We'll see you on the next one. Have a great day.
Yeah.
Thanks, dudes.
Thanks for listening to the Fitfiliate podcast. If this was helpful to you and you would like to jump on a 1-hour call to solve one problem for free, click the link.